I have now installed RAM, CPU and the non-volatile Memory Express SSD into the case onto the motherboard. Now, I do have a single stick of RAM, but I don't care about the loss of performance from just having single channel, because as far as I remember, dual RAM, which I do have here at 32 gigabytes in single plank, performs kind of similar to dual channel. So that should be fine until I can afford the second and then the third and the fourth plank of 32 gigs of RAM. Now for the NVMe SSD, I didn't really need a heatsink, and actually this is a Samsung SSD, and Samsung explicitly advises against putting any heatsinks onto the drive because they say that the thermal performance of the drive is already optimized. So if you put any kind of additional heatsinks on it, you might actually make it less performant. Now, realistically, I do not expect more than, let's say, a few degrees of temperature decrease under normal operation. And the main reason that I still installed the heatsink is that I would like to increase the thermal mass of the system. So NVMe SSDs are super fast, but it's exactly during the highest speed transfers that the most heat is generated. So if I can have something absorb or soak in that extra heat, that should allow me to have a longer boost performance, boost speed time from the SSD. So essentially, I'm adding this heatsink just as a kind of a thermal capacitor, so that it can accept extra heat and then slowly dissipate it afterwards. I may have to remove it because it's the slot is quite close to the GPU slot, and I do have a protective backplate on the GPU, so it might clash with the heatsink. I may need to remove it, and I'm a little worried about using the metal braces to attach the heatsink to the SSD. The back side of the SSD does look like it's an isolative coating or something, and I think these metal brackets do not touch the motherboard, so I should be fine, but it's still a little unsettling to put too much metal onto the motherboard. Alright, so I would like to have a test run of the system before I finalize everything, but for that I still need a few more things. So first one is the GPU that I have already salvaged from my previous build. And then I will still need to salvage my Noctua cooler from my old system. And I would also need to take out the Arctic 12 centimeter cooler and the Samsung SSD drive, 2.5-inch SSD drive from the system. After that, I'm hoping to install the CPU cooler. No fans at the moment, so CPU cooler, GPU, then have a test run, see if it turns on, and if it does, then I'll proceed to finalize it. Install the bottom bracket, install the fan here, install the fan on the side bracket, which will go up here, cable manage everything properly somewhere in between, or as properly as I can, and then think on what will remain to be done, specifically about dust protection on the bottom and the top as the most critical parts of the system, and then also in terms of better cable management, because for example this thick 24-pin connecting cable, I don't think I can cable manage that good enough, so I may wish to have a more flexible version of it, and maybe with angled connectors for the PSU, but that remains to be seen. So for now, let's proceed to remove the CPU cooler from the system and transplant it onto the new one. Speaking of the Noctua cooler, I will probably want to replace the fan. It has been in operation for 11 years now. It still works, but this is kind of getting marginally close to to the day it will probably stop functioning. So I should probably get a backup, maybe have a dual fan operation for a while, if both fans fit into the case. And I would like to spend a moment to appreciate that Noctua actually sent me an IM04 mounting kit when I asked for this. So I had to provide a proof of purchasing the new Ryzen CPU, and I had to provide a proof of owning or purchasing a Noctua CPU cooler in the past. But after that it was super quick to get this mounting kit. Now this specific cooler is rated as acceptable for the Ryzen 5600X, but it's not perfect for it. So apparently it may limit the CPU boosting to shorter periods of time, but I just would like to reuse it. I would like to increase the lifetime of the CPU cooler for now. I'm not sure if I'm actually going to ever replace it. I just like how quiet and efficient it is. And I believe that the current CPU that it sits on, the Phenom X4945, has a higher TDP than the Ryzen 5600X. And at least on this Phenom CPU, I don't think I have ever seen any thermal throttling. It might be like 95 watts TDP, and Ryzen is 65. So despite what Noctua says on their website, I believe this CPU cooler will perform just fine. The thermal paste I've purchased myself, it doesn't seem to really matter what kind of the top thermal paste you get. Now for the CPU cooler, unfortunately, this case is from 2009 or even before that time. So unlike the modern cases, it does not have an opening on the backplate. So to remove the CPU cooler, I will actually have to remove the motherboard. Yeah, it's like unbuilding a computer. But alright, there's no other way forward, so I'll have to proceed. I did not have to unscrew the motherboard because it was just the backplate on the other side and nothing fixing the cooler itself. But now I really want to wash this one. Before I try cramming all the components into the case and then closing the case, I would like to have a test run to see if it works. Now for this I have installed the GPU and plugged in the power. I have also installed the CPU cooler, but there's no thermal paste on the CPU itself, and there's no fan on the CPU cooler, if you can see this. So that should be fine for a brief turn on, but obviously I would have to remove it and add paste and the cooler before long-term operation. Now this is a 2.5 centimeter thick fan, and it seems to fit on the side bracket, but it is actually touching some of the heat pipes of the CPU heatsink. So when I install the CPU fan, which will be on this side, I will probably not have space anymore for the thick fan, and I will have to use a thin 15mm fan. Right, let's give it a try. Power on. The moment of hope or the moment of desperation? Let's find out. and it has booted. It says BIOS is updating, LED firmware, do not shut down to prevent damage. So I guess that is fully functional. Let's wait for the actual BIOS screen still. Oh yeah, here it comes. Dell F2, new CPU installed, enter setup, F1 to run setup. Yeah, it definitely works. Actually, let me enter setup. I do happen to have keyboard connected. And CPU is at 66 without the paste and without the cooler. Now I wonder if the NVMe drive is recognized. So RAM is recognized. Where can I see the storage? Alright, it's now at 68 degrees. I guess I'll shut it down and we'll look for the storage after I finish the build.